LNS catalog number 16895. Indigo bunting with red-eyed vireo in the background.
This bunny has a natural bird with its voice that you don't get in all of them. And the notes aren't quite as evenly paired.
Okay, let's start with Tanager. First song of the day, Chick Burrs, and then breaking in the song along Potomac Road.
Good morning. My name is Regina Gloria, and I'm the Director of Education at Ragdale. You just previewed a short video of the entryway of Alice Hargrave's studio in Bucktown, Chicago, where the artist will be sharing more of her work during today's Creative POV Artist Talk. Thank you for joining us this morning. Alice Hargrave is a photo-based artist working in Chicago. She incorporates sound and video within layered installations of her photographic imagery in space. Her work reflects on the notion of impermanence, environmental insecurity, habitat loss, and species extinctions. Hargrave recently collaborated with the Cornell Lab of Ornithology in New York to create her project, Last Call's Pink Noise, portraits of threatened birds using sound waves of their last calls in the wild. This is part of an extensive list of projects which has allowed her to exhibit all over the world, including China, France, and various local and national venues. And earlier this year, before the pandemic struck, she spent a month at Ragdale as an artist in residence, where I felt it was kind of a natural fit for her research, being in such proximity to the prairie. Marina Post will be joining her in the conversation. She's a self-taught interdisciplinary fiber artist in Chicago, who has used varied material to create tactile objects of hope and beauty. She currently explores the alchemy of synergy of natural fibers, dyes, and botanical elements. She's been actively involved with Chicago Bird Collision Monitors as a weekly volunteer during the migratory season. The two will go further into the Bird Collision project later on in the conversation. Alice and Marina, thank you both for being here.
Welcome everyone to my studio. That was the walk along the parkway where I planted all the plants and trees on both sides of the street. And it was during lilac time, my favorite time of the year. And a lot of the plants out there I use in my work and have used in my work since the very beginning of my practice. So I thought I'd start by just walking you through the studio to give you a feel for where I'm at before we look at the work more closely. Here's a piece Esperanza. You can get an idea of the scale. My own indoor jungle here. And then walking into the space here. This is a printing area here for kind of medium scale printing. And as we walk in here, here's my beast. This is my big printer, my right hand that I love when he behaves, she. Some other work. And you can see different surfaces here where I'm showing and working on different projects. I have a lot of water projects going on right now. We'll look at these later. These are from the Everglades and Big Cypress. And here you can see my test strips. I do a lot of layering of color just to kind of see where I'm at in terms of color and the progression of changes of color. My ping pong table that's doubles for ping pong and work. And this is some of the coral reef work I'm working on with the sounds, underwater sounds of fish and reef life. Here's another space here where another water project I'm working on global freshwater lakes and how climate change is affecting global lakes. Just to give you a feel for the space and the work. Here's some of the individual bird calls we'll be looking at. Here's some of the fabric, the tests of the fabric for the fashion work we'll look at in a little while, where the bird calls were made into dresses and blouses. Some color strips, test strips. And here's the translucent fabric that you'll see in the installation. So you kind of get an idea of how you can, this is a test strip on the fabric. And experimenting with different, here's the tiger. This was from the China project. That's the sound wave patterns or the roar of the South China tiger, who's virtually extinct in the wild. Some other color events here playing off of each other. Tapestry work. So this is woven. And now I'm going to meet you back at my computer over here. And Regin's going to show you a video of an installation to see what it's like being in the installation. So I'll see you back in a sec.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Alice. Good morning. My name is Regina Gloria. I'm the Director of Education at Ragdale. Thank you, Alice, for giving us that brief little tour. Like she said, I just wanted to share a little bit of a video that she had put together so that you can see one of the projects, and then we'll get into the conversation as it gets on. Thanks, Alice, for putting that together. That was an exhibition at Lake Forest College, is that correct?
That's right, yes.
Do you want to begin by just telling us a little bit more about what we just saw?
Yes, so that was a layered installation of the bird calls, layered in front of a background landscape where the birds used to thrive. We can look at, I'm going to share my screen and go into the presentation here so you can see. Is that showing up as full screen?
Yep, looks good.
Yeah. Do you see those edges or? Looks like.
If you press the play on the middle button, then we'll get rid of those live images.
There we go. Okay. So, hi everyone. Here is the piece that you just looked at, and the sound recordings that you heard walking down the street, as well as in this piece, are all the vintage recordings from the Cornell lab that I've been working with, and the kind of hieroglyphic patterns of the individual bird calls. And in this piece is called Green Days on Any Given Night, Migration Season Along the Mississippi Flyway. So I'm kind of putting the birds back into environments where research has shown where they used to thrive. And in this picture, there's two of the most threatened birds of North America. The California Condor is in the foreground, the pink. And the nene bird is towards the rear, the color, the purple and kind of goldish color piece. And then indigo buntings as well. So I photograph the sound wave patterns of the bird calls and layer them and color them with the actual colors of the birds so that the loud colors and unexpected colors of the birds can be a voice for the birds, almost like color as advocacy. So thinking about, I'm going to go to this, thinking about that ubiquitous refrain of why save that simple brown bird, and talking about the California grasshopper sparrow. Well, that brown bird might have hot pink feet or bright yellow eyes. So I'm trying to think about finding the most unusual, unexpected colors of the birds so that could be a voice for the birds. So. And
Alice, before you continue on, would you just tell us a little bit about the beginnings of like why birds and how that kind of originated with your?
Sure. Yes, absolutely. So this whole project, Last Calls Pink Noise, started when I heard the last calls of the oho bird, last mating calls, calling out to a non-existent female. So it was literally the last calls of the last bird of a species and reaching out into the world. And I just found that so gut-wrenching that it led me to the Cornell lab where they house the recordings of these voices, and just thinking of the library as a repository of evidence of biodiversity past that's not there anymore, and that you could go to a library, and just how nature has become a mediated event for us now. We often can only access nature or habitat through mediated ways. So that led me to the birds. And then the birds also just kept shouting at me. I really felt like the birds, like along the parkway or near the garage or from my roof, I just felt they were shouting at me. They were calling me. Or I just became really all of a sudden in tune to them at a certain point.
I think you have a few more images of the gallery space.
Yeah. That shows kind of the movement of the fabric. There's a small fan there that helps the fabrics to move in space. And the transparency of the fabric is kind of referencing the fragility of the species and habitat. And you can see the works on paper in the background versus the fabric. And this is a recent piece for a show that was in China that was curated by Natasha Egan from the Museum of Contemporary Photography. And it's the threatened birds of China for the Lianzhou Photo Festival. So I focused on the red-crowned crane, the crested ibis, and then I couldn't help but just go, get the recordings of that tiger. So that was my first mammal. So here, this is how it starts, by layering on paper in 2 dimension just to see how the plants and the landscapes can layer with the sound waves. And then this is what it actually turned into. It was produced over there, the tigers in the foreground, and you can see the opaque landscapes are in the very back, and then the transparent bird calls are in the foreground. And that piece is called Calls Along the Way, Guangdong Province. The way kind of referring to the Taoist belief of man living in harmony with nature. So kind of trying to bring the spiritual and the scientific together, if you will. Here's a piece. This is migratory season in Chicago. They're all different birds that I saw in one season. So it's called Sightings Calls, Archival Recordings by Arthur A. Allen. He was the founder of the Cornell lab, so I only used the recordings that he made for this piece. So, and then the colors of the actual birds. So there's the snowy egret on the top. I don't know if you want to hear all of them, but they're goldfinch from top down, indigo bunting, song sparrow, black and white warbler, palm warbler, song sparrow, scarlet tanager, song sparrow again, the Baltimore oriole, the ruby-crowned kinglet, and then the pileated woodpecker on the bottom. And then this was at Lake Forest. This was at the same exhibit, but in this other gallery there. So this is kind of a combination of figure, ground, landscape, and the bird calls. So here's the same bird calls, but in a different venue. And that's the Esperanza piece on the wall. So thinking about the landscapes again where the birds might thrive. Here's another layout. This piece is called The Luxury of Night Migration with scarlet tanager and indigo bunting calls. I just became fascinated about night migration and how magical it was to think about all these birds flying overhead in the middle of the night and how just mystical and magical that is while we're sleeping. So that's the kind of origins of these pieces that start in 2-dimension and works on paper and then eventually grow into 3-dimension if I so do. So this is, does anyone have any, Regin, did you want to?
Yeah, I actually wanted to just interject here a little bit and wanted you to speak a little bit about your, just formally talking about your compositions. I mean, they're obviously like musical scores, and we had spoken earlier about them kind of like almost resembling hieroglyphics, especially that one previous piece that was set up in a column-like structure. Could you talk a little bit more about your formatting and your decision making and how it's presented in this particular way? And then it'll, I think, eventually lead into you talking about it as pattern for fabrics.
Yeah. Well, I would take the spectrograms from the Macaulay Library and photograph them as screenshots and stitch them together into these patterns. And then color each different call with a different color of the actual bird. So that's how those kind of were generated. And then in this piece, for example, this is called Biosphere with the California Condor. So while researching, I found that the California Condor used to thrive in tropical settings like Florida. And so this was the beginning of the way for me to put that bird back into a landscape where it was known to thrive. So that's what kind of started that trajectory, thinking about that. That's a deep.
And interestingly enough, your images themselves become the landscapes. Just they almost look like the trees, and we'll see in some of the images in a little bit how they sort of mimic some of the landscapes that you captured as well in your photography.
Thank you. Yeah. So the California Condor is mostly black, but he has these hot pink, bright pink features. So that's what I was including here. And in the sound, here's the snowy owl. So so in the sound recordings that you heard earlier, it was really important for me to keep the sounds of the researchers talking too, so it wasn't just like ambient bird calls. You know, I wanted it to be really evident that it was a document of nature and not nature itself, and that it was an archive and it was a scientist talking. And likewise in the layered patterns, like here I do keep the sound wave patterns of the researchers as well as the birds included, just like in the sound. So snowy owl here, you can note his beautiful yellow eyes. And that's an example of where that color comes from. So this is the snowy owl calls. This was a commission by Open Lands for one of their funders. They asked me to make a piece for one of their patrons, and their favorite bird was a snowy owl. So I did this portrait for them. They're showing up more and more further south in our area. I have not yet seen one in the wild, though, sadly. But the first time I heard an owl in the wild loud was at Ragdale this winter at night. Hearing them at night was just stunning for this city girl. So this is the black stork and the white stork. So this was another commission to do some of the rare birds of Italy for another project, which turned into this white stork piece. Again, you know, using the natural hot pink colors of the bird itself. The color is advocacy, if you will. And then that turned into this project. So you can see how the fabric pattern here, the pattern turned into this fashion. Designer Jane Pendry was introduced to the work. She saw the work online, and then Maggie Miners, who some of you might know, she was friends with Jane and introduced us and kind of put us together. And Jane wanted to do a line of clothing, dresses, blouses, etc., using the bird call patterns. And I was, of course, always excited with this idea of putting the work to raise money for the birds. So I was okay to do it as long as all the profits went to the Cornell lab, which they did. And I just wanted a dress or a blouse, so that's all. And then, so there you can see, here they are prepping in their studio. This is a fashion house in Paris, and then it travels throughout different.
And Alice, before this sort of serendipitous moment happened where your patterns were discovered, did you at all envision your work sort of transcending beyond what we had seen earlier? I mean, obviously they were transferred to, was it silk or the textile material hanging as drapes in the gallery? Did you ever envision it taking on the form of textiles or fabric?
I did. That was something I really wanted to do. So actually to find someone to produce the work in fashion, in clothing that could sell and raise money, and this came about. So I think it was very fortuitous. So, and I'd like to do more with her with different patterns. In fact, I would like to also do the underwater project. I think that'd be really cool to do the coral reefs or the sounds of the fish, etc. So, yeah, there's a PR, Dovima Paris. And then from the snowy days at Ragdale, I went 2 weeks later to spend 5 weeks in Florida on another artist residency. Finally was able to apply to artist residencies because I had an empty nest bird reference for the first time in my long time. So I could actually apply to artist residencies. And so I went to Florida and discovered the Floridian birds and the flora and the fauna and this amazing bird that I fell in love with, the Anahinga bird. And then I just became fascinated in the landscapes where the birds thrived, the mangroves. That's a great white heron. And just getting up at the crack of dawn and seeing these magnificent landscapes and these subtle birds that you could just faintly pick out in the distance. You can kind of see way over in the far left, far away as well. It's just a land that was foreign to me and just so beautiful. Here's another focused more on the flora, excuse me. And then this became my also a new favorite bird. This is the Roseate Spoonbill, who we didn't see many of them, but I did see a few. And this is an image of what they look like. They're like prehistoric almost, with that spoonbill shape beak. And unfortunately, their range is shifting. Their habitat is shifting to the north because of climate change, because the waters are getting too deep for them to fish. And the temperatures are also making them go further north. But we did see some in Florida. And this is by Audubon. And so this led me to, I'm doing a project which is imagining and tracing John Audubon's work from the Florida Keys and the dry tortugas. So I was in search of the original 25 birds that he made in his Floridian folio in 1831. So here are some examples of those birds. This is the little blue heron. And so I had to go, of course, to the dry tortugas, which was pretty close to Key West, and you could take a boat out there. I went out a few times on boat and then also on a little puddle jumper airplane, which was the coolest thing. And this was just like at the cusp of the pandemic. So this was, I think, March 13th, Friday the 13th. I took this little puddle jumper flight, terrified. Everybody like didn't want to look at each other. It was like the beginning of like, should I really take this flight and get sick? But anyway, it was heaven on earth being here in the dry tortugas. This is me doing some recording of the brown boobies, they're called, who are nesting there. And the sounds were just extraordinary. So I did video, sound recording, and then I have an underwater camera I've been working with that's so awesome that has a little floaty, and I just go and I photograph underwater. So I was doing underwater and then sky. And here's the, what?
Thank you, or whatever.
Huh? This is a video of the magnificent frigate. They were soaring overhead, and just, this isn't a piece yet, but it's just to give you an idea of some of the video I'm going to be working with these birds. They just are hanging above and barely moving, like not moving, just kind of floating in this very spacey way. And they're huge.
And Ellis, it sounds like obviously all of these opportunities and experiences, you were able to commingle with a lot of non-artists who are sort of interested in the same material or subject matter. And I know you've got a bunch of images here coming up, but could you talk a little bit about your relationship to some of these people? And then that'll sort of segue into our conversation with Marina. I want to make sure she gets some time too.
Right. So, that's the giant frigate. So yeah, I've been working with researchers and scientists and the other video and sound recording artists who have been merging together various sound recordings and video, working with me together, which I love collaboration. So I'm going to try, I don't know where we are on the clock, I'm going to try to get through these last couple projects just to give you an idea. This is the famous bird Martha. She was the last passenger pigeon. This is her at the Smithsonian, and this is to just show the beautiful colors that Martha had. And I started working with the passenger pigeon and Martha because a curator is working on a project and asked artists to do something for the 100-year anniversary of the suffragette. And so thinking in terms of birds, I wanted to see how I could relate the birds and the voice of the birds. And I found that an interesting parallel, that at the same time that women gained their voice through the vote, Martha lost her voice. So she became extinct at the same time that we got our voice. So that started this project called the Suffragette Work. And this is the closest kin of the passenger pigeon, the band-tailed pigeon. So these are the suffragette bird pictures, the pink pigeon, the river tyrannulet, the Bonaire warbler. And then that suffragette work led me to the Conference of the Birds, which is this epic poem, Sufi poem from 1177. And we really need the wisdom of this book. So everybody should read it. And the parable is just so relevant today, of the birds gathering together and trying to find the true wisdom of the world. And we really need the wisdom of the birds right now. So this Conference of the Birds was introduced to me by a fellow at Ragdale, Margot Singer, who was right next to me, and we talked a lot, and just it was great to have that rapport with writers while I was there. So there's the flamingo and the loro, and the background to the piece that you saw in the window, which was the Conference of the Birds. There's the bird calls with the landscape that you saw in the art and place in the window. And speaking of windows, I'm not sure if this is speaking of windows, I want to segue into the use of the work again as putting the work to try to protect birds from crashing into windows, and thinking about using the warning calls of the birds to actually shout out to other birds to not fly here. And this is a video of a red-tailed hawk at Ragdale in the middle of the pandemic. He did not want us there. He was so used to having the space to himself that he was shouting at us, but just a quick clip here. It's awful video, by the way. I know I'm moving around and the whole thing, but just to hear the screeching calls. So this is the bird that I found just this year, a yellow-bellied sapsucker. So it just kind of brings to the forefront this issue of how the birds are affected by buildings in the city. How just the numbers are just extraordinary, the deaths every year. Chicago is right on the main migratory pathway of the Mississippi Flyway, and the numbers are just crazy. As you can see here, 2013, 300 million to 1 billion in 1 year. And so there is a bird ordinance in the works that Marina is going to talk about, and how we can make bird-friendly buildings using different kind of glasses. And some of the glass can be so subtle that you don't even see it with your human eye, but the birds see it. And so here's a mock-up at a gallery where I did the bird calls in the windows. So those are actually spaced apart in a dimension where the birds would see them and not crash into the windows. So I just thought it would be really poetic if the voices of the birds themselves shouted out to other birds, "Don't fly here." And so we're going to talk with Marina now.
Could you also just introduce her and how the two of you met and all of that?
Yes, absolutely. I wanted to say that actually. I've known Marina for a long time, but we did reconnect through the birds. I saw that she was doing bird collision monitoring through Instagram, I think, with her pictures of the birds that she collected. And I approached her to go out with her one morning, and I would like to be trained like her and eventually go with her much more often. But it was just so riveting, gut-wrenching, to walk around the loop in these canyons of glass and the crack of dawn and see these tiny little creatures. It just was. So I went with her, and so we've had a bird dialogue ever since, amongst many other dialogues, I should say. She's an amazing artist, a fiber artist, multidisciplinary artist, fascinating and fascinated. So. That work? I have questions for Marina too, so many questions, but we could start by what brought Marina to the birds, and can you talk about some of your most poignant experiences on your route during migration season?
Yeah, and I do have some images to share as well. Can you hear me all right?
Yep.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, so I've been a tree hugger and a nature lover my whole life. And at some point, I remember having similarly a sapsucker, believe it or not, hit my window. I didn't know it was a sapsucker at the time, but I went out and picked up this bird that had hit my window, and it was still alive. Its neck wasn't broken. And I just held it, and I was so amazed at the wonder I felt and just that this wild creature was in my hand. It felt like such a privilege to hold it. And I ended up just holding it for about 25 minutes, and then it kind of shook itself. And righted itself and was able to go on its way. That was my first introduction to just sort of holding a wild bird like that. And I heard about this organization that was doing training for bird rescue. And I thought, aha, I'm going to learn how to rescue birds and take care of them, and I'll know what to do if I find one. And that was Chicago Bird Collision Monitors. That was about 10 years ago. And when I went to the meeting, it turned out that it was how to be a monitor, not to actually do the husbandry of the birds. But anyway, I realized there was a need for this. I knew nothing about bird rescue and the amount of collision birds there were. And I started being a bird collision monitor. So that meant waking up at anywhere from 4:30 in the morning to 5:30 in the morning, and being assigned to a route down in the loop and walking until 9 o'clock in the morning, around and around and around, and picking up birds. And should I share some of those pictures?
Absolutely, absolutely.
I'm going to try to go share my screen.
And then we can talk about what the bird ordinance would require and where we are at with that ordinance at this juncture, I think.
Right.
Oh, look at these birds, aren't they just?
So that's a beautiful hawk that was a collision bird, and I had the privilege to hold that guy. Can you see my screen?
Very well.
Yeah. Okay.
What a beauty.
Yeah. Let's see. Full screen. There you go. That's a little warbler. I don't know if you can see the little tiny hairs on his nose. One of the things that I feel is when I hold these birds is you can see the details of their physiognomy and their feather patterns, and everything about them is so amazing. And when people say, you know, why are you going to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to rescue a bird? They haven't been out to rescue a bird yet. And once you help a bird, even one, migrate through the concrete jungle, you realize what a privilege it is to help these tiny, important creatures. There's a sapsucker. You can see the spider webs in his fur or his feathers. There's a little tiny oven bird. These guys are, this is from the Field Museum. So all of the birds that we salvage go to the Field Museum. And this Field Museum is a repository of data now, data sets of birds from a century ago, but into right now, the birds that we rescue provide source of data for researchers to understand bird populations, climate change, all sorts of information. And so every bird is tagged, and you can actually, if you've been a bird monitor and saved a bird, you'll find a bird with your name on it.
It's extraordinary how the color still survives after all that time too.
Yeah.
I know some of them sometimes fade or change, but it's still in the picture, it's extraordinary.
Yeah. Oh, friend, beautiful indigo bunting.
I love those. Aw.
Would either or both of you talk a little bit about the sort of the influence of these colors? I know that Alice, you mentioned it a little bit in direct sort of connection with the yellow of the snowy owl, but Marina as well, you know, as a textile fabric artist, could you talk a little bit more about the sort of impact of sort of being introduced to the scientific world of the bird study has affected your work?
I mean, I think for me, it's been much more about just the noticing that is powerful for me, noticing the plumage patterns and the fact that in nature, no color is right or wrong, and no color combination is right or wrong. And we are, as humans, we're so conditioned by fashion and what people tell us about what's, you know, the good color combinations. But nature doesn't think that way. It has completely different reasons for color patterns. And so I think that mostly what it has done for me is give me the freedom to work with colors in a way that I can explore with intentionality.
Yeah. That's great.
Look at that. Yeah.
That's a kingfisher.
Yeah. Mm.
These guys are all collision monitors. This gives you a sample of the dead on a pretty busy morning. So we'll have up to 100 birds dead, salvages. And then this is the living on a busy morning, and they're all hopping about and chirping in the back of the car,
Wow.
waiting to go to rescue. And everything from common seagull to hawk, I think this is a Cooper's hawk, to a tiny, tiny warbler. And this was a bittern, I believe, American bittern. He didn't like that I picked him up. And this is one of my most poignant stories. This was a little saw-whet owl. It's a terrible photo, but I found him in the loop, or her, and had collided with a building. You can see the eye showing the collision. And because we were able to rescue that bird and get it to Willowbrook Nature Sanctuary, they were able to relieve the pressure on the brain, and they were just able to send that bird on its merry way to finish its migration. So having feet on the ground and eyes to see these birds, we can rescue them and get them to treatment and get them on their way. And that is that's an absolute privilege to me. So that's what I have to share about that. And as far as let's see, I want to stop screen sharing. As far as the bird ordinance is concerned, through our organization, we've been working with the Audubon Society, and Brian Hopkins actually was a very instrumental alderman who helped to instigate this bird-friendly ordinance to start moving through city council meetings, and working with sustainability, working with the lead council. And so basically at this time, we are focusing on how we can design buildings to limit the percentage of collisions. As Alice mentioned, glass is, more and more we just have buildings made of glass, and that's essentially reflecting the sky, reflecting trees. People like to have trees planted outside their buildings, and that reflects essentially a sky with a tree, and a bird says, oh, I need rest, and smashes. So if we can pattern the glass so that it doesn't see a tree reflected, then it's one less collision. Also, visual designs in the way the building is actually formed. So one of the things, we can use undulations in buildings now because we have that technology, and creating undulations or surfaces that are uneven also provides visual distraction to the birds, so that they can migrate past them without hitting them. Lighting, interior lighting has been critical. We've enacted since 2002 a lights out program so that the city of Chicago actually in the loop dims all of the lights of the skyscrapers, and all of the lights that are like on top of buildings and things, those all go down in the night during migratory season so that birds are not attracted to those. And interesting to your point about the bird calls on the buildings shouting out to the birds is that somebody did research using the Field Museum birds. And one of the things they found is like which birds are most tending to collide. And it turns out that the most social birds are the ones that collide the most. The ones that are most vocal around the buildings tend to collide the most, versus the ones that are very quiet and just passing in their way.
You think they're so busy chatting, they're not paying attention.
You have to wonder. Or if they're all like, hey, come on over, this is cool.
It just makes so much sense, though, especially in those buildings where there are huge trees in the lobby.
Yep, exactly.
And they're lit, so, I mean.
The bird has been flying all night long, and it doesn't see the glass. It just sees a tree light, and it thinks this is a safe place to land, and then hits the glass. And basically, the fact is that if people are enacting these design principles from the beginning, there's no extra cost, really, to employing bird-safe design practices. In fact, many of them are already being employed. Also, many of them are going to help design in terms of environmental sustainability, because those glasses can be used to keep more heat in the building or more cool in the building and so forth. So there's no real cost to employing those practices, but there is a very great cost to having to retrofit buildings. And I know Northwestern campus has been doing a lot of work this past few years and retrofitting for millions of dollars, retrofitting one of their great architectural buildings. I can't remember the name of the architect, but it was, an all glass building made, I think, in the 70s. And they just spent millions of dollars to retrofit the glass on that building to prevent bird collisions because there were so many. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of birds were hitting that glass.
Yeah.
So,
well, Alice, I'm sorry. If I just wanted to, because we're at 11:45 right now. Alice, I just wanted to know if, with the sort of plans and the vision that you have with that last image that you showed of your pattern on the windows, like how much further along would that be along the lines of Marina's comments about the actual building design? Do you see yourself working with architects on a much more direct level? So it's not like you're putting the artwork up after the fact, you're actually designing along with them when it comes to, window design or whatever you want to call it.
I would love to do that. Absolutely. I would love to outreach to architects, to people who might be in the design stage. Yes, the retrofitting is super expensive. You can use vinyl, or you can, the vinyl would be less expensive than redoing the glass. But that'd be fantastic. I mean, that was my goal. And I think that it can be so subtle that you barely even see it. So, it's not like it would be a blazing pattern. It would be so subtle, like etched glass, really fine, and humans, there's this glass that they're using now that humans barely see the line. It's just a way that the birds see it and the humans don't. And there's that misconception. You see people putting those bird decals, all over. And those just don't work. And the birds need a grid. They need a 2-inch by 4-inch grid in order to see it. They don't need like a decal of a bird here and over here. So that's like a misnomer, and that doesn't work. So, but the poetry of, trying to put the voices of the birds to work and have those birds shout out to other birds just really moved me. And I'd love to see that enacted as a way to prevent some collisions. It is just gut-wrenching to know the numbers of these birds, and especially in light of climate change and just this fall, as probably many of you heard, we've lost a quarter of the birds. It's just crazy. So yeah, it's very heart-wrenching, and we need those birds. So.
Well, in the last few minutes that we have, I know I want to be able to open it up to the rest of you. There's a few of you who put some comments in the chat box if you have an opportunity to take a look at that. But if anybody else has questions for Marina, please add them on, or for Alice. I know Karen Little, you commented that you worked with Patricia Rice on, or that you were in a residence with her, who had edited the Women's Voices Spring. That connects. Are you too familiar with that text?
I'm not.
Okay.
Patricia Rice.
I have to look for it. Women's Voices.
And Stephen had a question. And if you'd rather speak yourself, you could just raise your hand, or we could unmute you and you could just ask directly. But Stephen was wondering what the difference in sight between a human and a bird was and how that worked, if you're familiar with that.
Direct light pollution.
So birds see a very different spectrum of light than what we see. And they also, they see out of their peripheral vision more than their direct frontal vision. So, that affects when they're flying, especially at night, when there's limited light. That's why I think that those buildings that are lit are so much more attractive to them, because everything else is kind of muted around them and it just becomes like an arrow for them to hit that glass. I'm not a bird physiognomist, so I can't tell you exactly what color spectrum they see, but I know that they do see very differently from us.
I have I have last year I had 4 baby doves born on my windowsill in my bedroom here upstairs, and this year there's a dove with 2 babies right now, and it's kind of like Princess and the Pea, and the mama dove and the dad dove, they share hours, so it's 12 hours one, 12 hours the other, the male and the female, and they just keep sitting on these baby birds. You don't know until they're hatched until you start seeing them squirming around underneath, and so the adult bird just gets higher and higher and higher, and these, no matter how big these little babies get, they still sit right on top of them. It's absolutely adorable. So I don't know, that kind of is a non-segue, but I just love being in touch with the urban habitat. Oh, I know where I was going with that, which is that there's this trend and interest in what's called rewilding of the urban environment. And I find that really fascinating, to work on urban environments in a way that really welcome wild animals, such as the coyotes or other animals that are coming into our cityscapes because their habitat is being destroyed. So we need to learn how to commingle and live with these other animals. And 8:30 in the morning, just over here on Clybourne and Webster, big coyote galloping right through the intersection, 3-way intersection. All cars just stopped. Everybody was stunned. But, imagine if buildings had more green space on them, around them, bird-friendly glass. The imagination can really go wild in terms of how we could rewild.
Not only that, but I think that the more humans that can become aware of the wild that is in our city. I recently helped rescue a family of wood ducks. Wood ducks tend to, they nest in trees, and literally when the babies are born, within hours, they literally fall out of the tree to the ground and bounce. And then that was about over a mile from Humboldt Park. So there was no way for that bird to safely get to any sort of source of water with those babies. So we came in, and it was rather Keystone Cops of racing through the alley in people's backyards and stuff, but we rescued 10 babies and the mama, and were able to get them out of the city. But, if people aren't listening or looking or participating, those wild creatures, they can't live in this jungle with us. They need our help.
Well, in a matter of time, since we only have a certain amount of memory to record everything, just wanted to give both of you an opportunity to say any final words or to share with the audience anything else that you feel is important or critical at this point.
Does anyone have any questions or comments for us other than in the chat, or want to share any ideas? It's so nice to see everyone. Thanks for coming. One thing great about the Zoom thing is, Muriel can be here, and she's in DC. So isn't that cool? So anyway.
I'm interested in knowing who you call if you need to call a bird rescue.
So the hotline is available 24/7. It's Chicago Bird Collision Monitors. And the number is, I'll give it to you, 773-988-1867. And we literally have volunteers all over the city 24/7 available to just go out and find birds, because outside of migration, we still see birds hitting glass and needing rescue. So thank you for asking that question, and we're always looking for volunteers too.
I love this idea, Stephen, of sponge cities and rain gardens. That sounds very interesting too.
Yeah, there's also some ideas about microforests, which are beginning to circulate, which I think are quite fascinating, and will facilitate bird habitats and migration stop points.
That's great. Alice, what do you have in store in terms of your work? What is going to be presented next?
Well, I'm working on that Global Lakes project. It's called Lake Stories, how climate change is affecting freshwater lakes. And so I'm doing portraits of lakes using lake science data, and it's going to be a book and an exhibit. So I'm working kind of furiously on that, as well as the Conference of the Birds installation, for another show. And then I'm working with researchers out of England who are projecting sounds into unhealthy coral reefs. So they're projecting the sounds of a healthy coral reef onto an unhealthy coral reef and finding that that's helping the fish to come back and habitate that coral reef, revive that reef. So that alone isn't going to solve the waters getting hotter or anything, but they are transplanting corals into dead areas and then trying to bring back fish. So I've been working with the sounds. I just found that fascinating, especially since I've been working with sounds in nature, to work with underwater sounds. And so I've done a lot of underwater photography this last year and want to do similar installations. I have a venue where I'm going to do that. With both the Audubon bird work and the coral reef work, which will be the underwater sounds layered in front of the background of the reef. So
it's fantastic. You're
a lot of water right now.
Environmental activist, artist activist at this point as well. That's great to hear. How about you, Marina? Do you have anything coming up that we should know about?
I've been in incubation this year, and I am starting learning weaving, and actually bird nests have been recently given to me, a book on bird nests, and trying to think about, I'm a fiber artist, so thinking about fiber and weaving and bird nests and how they're made and how that might become a source of inspiration for some of my felt work.
That's great. Marina actually posted the number on the chat, so if you need to call them, it's located there. I want to thank both of you for being here, and as well as all of our guests for your time and attention. I think that's all the time that we have right now. I hope you enjoyed today's Creative POV Artist Talk. Like I mentioned before, it'll be recorded and will be available on Ragdale's website and then on our YouTube channel soon, along with, eventually down the line, an educator's guide that is specifically tied into Alice's work. So you could look further into both of the artists' work at their websites, alicehargrave.com, and for Marina, it's studiomforgood.com. Is that correct?
Yep.
And then, of course, you could check out more on the Bird Collision Project at birdmonitors.net. Our next Creative POV Artist Talk is actually this afternoon at 1 o'clock with fiction writer Kathy Fish, who will be interviewed by Margaret Hawkins. So I hope you can join us for that. But thanks again, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Regin, for organizing this, and Ragdale, and it was dreamy being there. Honestly, it was the best.
Great to have you.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.